This is Theology Bits with Pastor Ben, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. This week is our second installment of our series, Journeying with God in Our Wilderness. And this time we will be talking about complaint, and it's going to be built loosely on Exodus 16, 1-3, which is the first time in the wilderness wanderings when the people complain. They're going to do a lot of complaining as it goes on, and what I want to do today is for us to explore that a little bit. What's happening there? It might not be what we usually expect from this understanding of complaint, meaning that they're just have little faith, or that they're disgruntled, or that they just are a group that's frustrating to work with. There might be something deeper happening on a variety of levels. To do that, we need to start with where we were last week, with remembering that wilderness is always comparative. In this case, it is the comparison of where they were before in Egypt. And in our video last time, we said there were some associations with wilderness and with Egypt. In Egypt, they were in slavery. However, also in Egypt, there was an association of abundance. And even though they were enslaved, Egypt is itself, the space of Egypt in the ancient world was coated with abundance because they had the Nile River that flooded and made the land so fertile that it just was understood in the ancient world that this is the place where life really thrives. So there was an association of abundance. Also, it was a place that they understood as the enemy. After all, they were enslaved there. Wilderness, by contrast, was coated, of course, with freedom. In wilderness, they may not have liked living there, but they were subject to no one. However, rather than abundance, they are in scarcity. And once more, even though it was a different kind of enemy than Egypt was, the wilderness was also kind of an enemy. They add something, though, here in chapter 16, where wilderness was not just about scarcity, it was about starvation. And the whole of wilderness becomes associated with death. We are going to die here. There is no food. In chapter 15, they dealt with there was no water. And then there was a miracle of making bitter waters sweet, and they were able to drink this water. But now there's no food, and they're going to starve, and they're going to die. Egypt, by contrast, because of the abundance, was coated, here we're alive. Maybe not living in the way we want, but we're alive. And so that leads to complaint. That is, continually comparing where we were and where we are. That comparison will lead to conversation about that comparison, and in this case, leads to complaint. Maybe we were better off before. Well, we're going to look at that carefully, but I want to ask, is there some grace in complaint? Is there something more than them just being ungrateful? And I think there is. And it might have some lessons for us for our wilderness. So the first aspect of this grace is for us to look carefully at nostalgia. What does it mean to look back? And I would like to suggest Nostalgia is not all bad. There is grace in our ability to remember. There is value in memory. We need, in fact, we've been talking about this as comparison. Comparison is, there's nothing wrong with comparison. We need to be able to compare. To understand where we are now, we have to know, what is this like compared to then? This is an important thing for us to understand the life that we're in. So memory is a very valuable thing, and that they can remember is important. That they can remember what abundance was is important. If all we have is scarcity and we accept that's what life is, then we will never strive for something else. And so we have memory now and then. And this memory, though, the thing about it is that it's incredibly situational. That we remember certain things and not others. And the reason we remember one thing rather than another is not because we're terrible at remembering, but it's because memory is really about now. Memory is not a historical reconstruction of the past. Not really. Memory is, where am I now? What meaning am I seeking now? What need do I have now? Well, what their need right now has to deal with starvation. And so, of course, the piece they're going to remember is abundance. And remember, after all, they don't see a wild difference in these places. The idea that we would look at it, well, this is absurd. Here you were enslaved, now you're free. Yeah, but they still feel like they're in the place of the enemy. They're in the place where life cannot be productive for them. So it might not be so wild for them to suggest, maybe we were better off. We're not in a better place anyway than we were in the first place. Second thing to point out that there might be some grace here. What does one do when you feel powerless? When we feel powerless of the situation around us, what can people do? Well, the most natural thing, they're going to talk. They're going to try and collectively, as a group, understand why is the situation beyond our control. Some of you might recall this from, for example, in the hardest times of the pandemic, when we met together on Zoom. There was a lot of speculation of what's going on and why. Very few of us had any ability to make any decisions about this. But we wanted to understand. And there is a grace in that they're able to do this. They're able to be community together, and they're able to talk. In Egypt, they did not have the abundance of time to be able to talk. The last moment of grace, and maybe most strikingly, freedom. The freedom that they had, frankly, to complain. Because there was a model for them trying to complain. And when they complained to Pharaoh, what happened? They were put down. They were punished by Pharaoh for complaining. Here, they complain against Moses, which is not especially productive. Moses wouldn't create this situation. But when they complain against Moses, continually, God will deliver. And so the grace that we see in the complaint itself is that the first of these points, freedom, is present. They have the grace to complain. And remember, this word complain is not productively asking questions and providing suggestions and asking for Moses to pray for them. No, it's complaint. It's frustrating. They're just talking, right? They have no power. They start, talking can lead to very quickly, very easily into gossip, into frustration, into very unproductive talking. But they have the freedom to do it. That there is a moment of grace that they can do that, and that God delivers, even though the way in which they're asking is not productive. And this is an important point as we think about journeying God in our own wilderness, is when we are in such a place of scarcity that we don't have the wherewithal to properly ask God for guidance. All we can do is complain. God hears anyway. God responds anyway. There is grace in that a poorly executed question, request, still is heard and not dismissed out of hand. This has been Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.